The last day of high school was supposed to be just that. A day of saying goodbyes, of nostalgia, of walking out those doors with a smile on your face, knowing it was the end of one chapter and the start of another. But for me, it turned into something else, entirely. Something that still haunts me to this day. I had stayed behind a little longer than most of my classmates, helping Mrs. Keller, my favorite teacher, pack up old classroom materials. She was retiring, and I guess I just wanted one last moment in the school I'd spent 4 years in. Everyone else had left by 3:30 p.m., but I didn't mind the quiet. In fact, I liked it. The halls were empty, the air thick with that stillness that only comes after a crowd has dispersed. It felt like the school was holding its breath, waiting for everyone to be gone before it could exhale. I should have left with the others, but I didn't. After helping Mrs. Keller, I wandered around for a little bit, cleaning out my locker and taking in the familiar sights for one last time. The place had always been alive with noise, laughter, footsteps, the hum of lockers opening and closing. But today, it was so eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're being watched. The lights flickered overhead, and for a moment, the school seemed to almost shudder. It wasn't just the quiet that got to me. It was the way everything felt different, like the building itself was somehow aware of me. It was as if the walls were closing in slowly, creeping towards me with every passing second. But I brushed it off. It was probably nothing. Maybe the school had been here too long, and after so many years of being filled with people, it didn't know how to be empty. That's when I saw Mr. Whitlow, the janitor. He had always been a fixture of the school. You could count on seeing him pushing his mop and bucket down the hall every morning, muttering to himself in that raspy voice of his. He wasn't much of a conversationalist, but I'd always noticed him, mostly because he was always there. You didn't talk to Mr. Whitlow, not unless you had to. But that day, he approached me as I was heading to the restroom. "Be out before the lights flicker," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Don't be in the halls when the school starts to remember." I laughed it off, but there was something unsettling in the way he said it. The words were too deliberate, like he was trying to warn me about something I didn't understand. He had that far-off look in his eyes, the kind of look that made you wonder if he wasn't fully there, if his mind had slipped just a little too far. I smiled and waved, dismissing it as just creepy old man superstition. The lights flickered once, and I felt a chill run through me, but I told myself it was nothing. I went to the restroom and spent a few minutes washing my hands. When I stepped out, the hallways felt emptier. No footsteps, no murmurs, no distant conversations. Just silence, deep and heavy. I was starting to feel the weight of it, but I figured I'd been in the building too long. I was probably just imagining things. I was wrong. I lost track of time, I guess. When I finally checked my phone, it was already 7:33 p.m. The sun had set, and the school was darkening. I hadn't meant to stay this late, but now I was stuck. I tried to leave through the gym doors, but they were locked. I tried the emergency exits, but they wouldn't budge. The office phone didn't work either. No dial tone, nothing. I started to panic then. It wasn't just that I couldn't leave. It was the way the building felt. The air had shifted, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I felt watched, like I wasn't alone. But the strange thing was, I was alone. The footsteps I heard weren't mine. I turned a corner, and I could hear them clearly behind me, following me down the hall. But when I turned around, there was no one there. And then, the whispers started. It was like a low murmur, just below the threshold of hearing, but it was there. Voices, indistinct, like a crowd gathered somewhere just out of sight. I didn't know if I was hearing things or if they were real, but I couldn't ignore it. The sound made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was starting to lose it. I needed to get out. But then I saw something. A figure. It wasn't outside the window, but inside the building, standing perfectly still by the corner of the hallway. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but when I moved closer, I saw it clearly. A person, or at least what looked like one, standing there in the dim light. I ran towards the figure, but by the time I got to the hallway, it was gone. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I had seen, but I couldn't. I remember hearing that old rumor about a student who died in an accident at the school years ago. It was an unsolved mystery, just whispers and half-remembered stories. But suddenly, I wasn't so sure it was just a story anymore. It's been months since the nightmare began. Well, what I thought was the end of it. I thought I had left everything behind, that when I walked away from Redwood Hills High, I was leaving it all in the past. The ghosts, the whispers, the empty hallways where things shouldn't have been. I thought I could move on, like anyone would. I started community college, tried to breathe easy again, but that weight, whatever it was, never lifted. Not really. The dreams are the worst part. I wake up drenched in sweat most nights, heart pounding in my chest like I've just run a marathon. But there's something worse than the dreams. There's the feeling, the constant sensation of something, following me. It's like I'm being watched even when I'm completely alone. Every shadow seems to be alive, shifting when I turn away, and when the house is quiet, I hear whispers. At first, I tried to ignore it. Stress, I thought. Anxiety. After everything that happened at Redwood Hills, it makes sense that it would haunt me. But it didn't feel like just my mind playing tricks. It felt real, like it was something outside of me, something that had attached itself to me, and I couldn't shake it off. So I tried to move forward. I told myself it would get better. I'd buried that chapter of my life. Or at least, I thought I had. But then came the email. The subject line said, "Mandatory school record review. Please report to room B3 at Redwood Hills High this Friday." I almost deleted it without thinking. The school was supposed to be closed for renovations. Why would they need me back? And then there was the room itself. Room B3. I knew every inch of that school, but I didn't remember anything called Room B3. My heart dropped when I saw the room number. It didn't exist in my memory. It couldn't. I should have ignored it. I should have stayed home. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, pushed me to respond. I drove to Redwood Hills on Friday. It was a weird, grey afternoon, the kind of light that makes everything feel off. The school stood there like an abandoned monument to something lost, quiet and cold. The security guard let me in with no questions, just a tired look in his eyes that made my skin crawl. He barely acknowledged me, but as I walked past him, he muttered something under his breath, so low I almost didn't hear it. "If you're heading to B3, don't lose track of the walls," he said, almost as though he was warning me, though I wasn't sure about what. People forget where they are in that wing. I just nodded and kept walking, chalking it up to a weird comment from an overworked guy. But when I stepped inside the building, I realized how wrong everything felt. The halls were too quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering in ways that made my stomach churn. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. And it wasn't just the building that felt wrong. I could feel it. Like there was something waiting, something lurking in the empty corners, just out of sight. The closer I got to the part of the school I didn't recognize, the more the unease wrapped around me like a tightening grip. Room B3 was tucked away at the very end of a hallway I didn't remember existing. The door was metal, old, with a peeling sign. The room looked like something out of a horror movie. Cold, sterile, the kind of place you'd find in a forgotten corner of a building that no one ever really checks. I opened the door and stepped inside, and the first thing I noticed was the silence. It was so absolute. There was nothing. No noise, no hum of activity. Just an oppressive stillness that almost felt like the room itself was holding its breath. I wasn't alone. There were 5 other people seated at desks. All of them looked as uncomfortable as I felt. None of them spoke at first, just exchanged glances. I was about to say something when a woman walked in. She didn't say a word. She just handed each of us a slip of paper. A detention slip, I assumed. The kind you get for skipping class or acting up. I looked down at the slip she handed me, and my heart stopped. It wasn't my name. It wasn't even close. It was the name of the boy I'd seen in the window all those months ago. The one who had died, the one I'd never forgotten. I stared at the slip, unable to make sense of it, and then glanced around at the others. No one seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't react the way I thought they would. But I could feel it in my bones. Something was horribly wrong. The woman turned and left without a word, and I was left to stare at the slip of paper in my hand, the name burned into my mind. That's when the whispers began. At first, they were just soft sounds, like a distant murmur. But soon they grew louder, more urgent, coming from the walls, the desks, the floor itself. I could hear them, but I couldn't make out the words. It was like the room was alive, breathing, pulsing with something I couldn't see but could feel crawling up my spine. One of the students, an older guy who looked like he'd been through something, got up and walked toward the door. He tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. He pulled and yanked, his face turning red with frustration. But the door was locked. It wasn't just locked. It was like it was resisting him, like it wasn't even supposed to open. Another girl at the back of the room looked at the blackboard and froze. She stared at her reflection in the glass, her eyes wide with terror. Her lips didn't move, but her reflection was mouthing something, the same words over and over. I didn't want to know what it was. I couldn't. That's when I noticed the names. They were scrawled across the desks, etched in deep, jagged lines, like someone had used a blade to carve them. The names of students who had vanished, students who had died, students who had never truly left. This room wasn't just a room. It was a place for the forgotten, the lost, the ones who had never escaped, who had been left behind. I understood then. B3 wasn't just a room. It was a holding place, a limbo for all the people who had been trapped in that school, for the ones who had disappeared without a trace. And then the disappearances started. The first one was quick. Too quick. The guy who tried to open the door screamed, and before I could react, he was just gone, like he'd never been there. 1 minute he was standing. The next, there was nothing but the empty space where he had been. No sound, no trace. He just vanished. Another girl tried to break the glass with a desk. She swung it hard, but before the glass shattered, she too disappeared. It was like she was swallowed by the room, consumed by the walls themselves. It hit me then. We were all connected. Each one of us was tied to a tragedy at the school. A name, a face, a story that had been buried long ago. I thought about the rumors I'd heard, the whispers about a fire drill, about the room being used as an overflow room. B3 had been forgotten, but it never really left. I tried to leave, I tried to escape, but as the last 2 students vanished one by one, I realized I was the only one left. I didn't even hear the door open. The woman who had given me the detention slip was standing in front of me, a final slip of paper in her hand. She placed it on my desk. I read it, my fingers trembling. To leave. Tell us what you forgot. And then a voice, distorted and warped, filled the room. Why were you the last one to leave that day? I knew the answer. I'd known it all along. I had never spoken it, not to anyone, not even to myself. I had left someone behind, a student, locked in a classroom, screaming for help. I just walked away. The moment I spoke the truth, the walls started to crack, the room shattered, crumbling into dust, and behind the blackboard, a hidden hallway appeared. It was the same hallway I had walked down months ago, the one I had escaped through, but this time it felt different. The air was cleaner, lighter. I crawled through the opening, desperate to get out. When I made it to the end, I found myself outside again. The sun was shining. The school was empty, but something wasn't right. I checked my phone, and there was a missed call from an unlisted number. Mr. Whitlow, janitor. That was the moment I realized I wasn't free. I got home and collapsed on the couch, exhausted and numb. And that's when the envelope came. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside, there was a handwritten class schedule. The ink was fresh, rushed. At the top, it read, Room A0. And beneath it, the note, See you next semester. You've been transferred to Room A0. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced. I thought I was done with that school, that I'd escaped. But now, I know. The school isn't done with me. I should have burned the schedule when I got it. I should have torn it up and let the paper burn to ash before it could do any more damage. But I didn't. I thought it was over, that the nightmare had ended. I thought that Redwood Hills High was behind me, that I had escaped it. After graduation, I transferred to a new college, a fresh start, a different city, new people, a new campus. For a while, it almost worked. I could almost believe that life was normal again. But no matter where I went, no matter what I did, there was always something there. A whisper, a glance at a bulletin board, a strange number on the back of a library book. It was always there, lurking, reminding me that something wasn't finished. Room A0. At first, I tried to brush it off. The first time I saw it was on a flyer in the library. Just a random number, a strange label. Room A0. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a mistake. But then it showed up again. On my student ID badge, under my assigned study space. Not room 103, not library annex 2, just a 0. The number haunted me, like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I tried to ignore it, of course. I didn't want to go looking for trouble. But I couldn't help myself. I followed the signs, the ones that weren't supposed to be there. Down hallways I hadn't noticed before. Places on campus that didn't seem to belong. The deeper I went, the more wrong it felt, like the school was changing as I walked through it. And then I found it. A door, hidden away in the basement of the library. No label, no name, just an etched circle. I should have turned back then. I should have walked away. But something inside me pulled me forward, like I was meant to find it. I opened the door. What I saw inside wasn't a classroom, it was something else. Something old. The room was decaying, the walls were peeling, the floor coated in layers of grime. It smelled like burned paper and dust. A chalkboard, broken and rotting, hung on one wall, the faintest trace of old writing barely visible, and in the center of the room, a desk, dust-covered and worn, but there, waiting for me. My name was carved into the wood. It wasn't fresh. It was old, faded, like it had been there for years. Decades, maybe. I didn't want to sit at that desk, but something inside me made me. As soon as I did, everything changed. The room shifted. It became clean, bright. The walls were fresh. The floor was polished. The smell of decay vanished, replaced by something sterile. A clock appeared on the wall, ticking. 12:03. I looked at my phone. 12:03. The students were there then, a dozen of them, sitting at their desks, staring ahead. But none of them saw me. None of them acknowledged me. They just sat there, repeating the same conversations over and over, their voices flat, mechanical. One girl in the front row was talking about her weekend. The same words, over and over, the same sentences. She didn't stop. And then I realized, I wasn't in the present, I wasn't in a normal classroom. The students were trapped. They were echoes, faded fragments of lives that had never moved on. Their conversations were loops, trapped in time, stuck like me. I stood up, my heart racing, and turned toward the door. But it was locked. Of course it was. It was always locked. I couldn't get out. Not this time. And that's when she noticed me. The girl in the front row, the one who wouldn't stop talking, suddenly turned and looked at me. Her eyes were wide. Too wide. Unnaturally so. She whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "If you're still aware," she said, her voice hollow, "it hasn't chosen you fully. Yet." Her words hung in the air, cold and heavy, and I knew right then that something terrible was coming. The room was changing again, the walls closing in on me. The whispers started, soft at first, but growing louder, coming from every corner, every crack in the walls. They told me things I hadn't done yet, things that were going to happen if I didn't escape, tragedies, losses. And I knew then I wasn't alone. Not truly. I was surrounded by lost souls, by people who had been taken, erased, forgotten, just like me. I turned to run, but the room shifted again. The walls pressed in. There was no escape. I couldn't leave. But I kept searching, desperately looking for any way out. That's when I saw it. The ledger. A thick, heavy book sitting on a shelf in the back of the room. I pulled it down, my hands shaking. The title read, "Those Who Stayed." I opened it. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink was faded, but the names were there, written in neat rows, names of students who had disappeared, who had died. Each name was followed by a date, a year, a cause of death. And there, in the middle of the page, I saw it. My name. It wasn't fully written. Only half. The rest was blank, empty, waiting. And I realized then, I wasn't meant to leave. I was meant to stay, to become one of them. The whispers grew louder, pressing in on me. The room was falling apart. I had to get out, but I couldn't. Then, the chalkboard caught my attention. Words appeared on it, written in thick black letters. Only the erased can leave. I didn't understand it at first, but then I did. If I wanted to escape, I had to erase myself. I had to remove every trace of me, every memory, every record, every mark that said I existed. I found it then, behind a panel in the back of the room, a furnace, small, glowing faintly. I grabbed the ledger, my hands trembling, and threw it in. The moment it touched the furnace, the room exploded into chaos. The walls shook, the floor cracked, the lights flickered, alarms blared. The screams of lost students filled the air. It was all collapsing. I ran, my heart pounding, through hallways that stretched and twisted, through rooms that repeated themselves. I didn't know if I could make it out, but I had to try. Finally, I reached the door, the exit. I threw it open and I was outside, but not where I expected. I was in a new hallway, clean, modern. The walls gleamed, the floors polished. Students walked by, oblivious, like nothing was wrong, like I wasn't even there. I grabbed one of them, a student, a girl with a backpack. I asked, my voice frantic, "What school is this?" She blinked at me, confused. "This is Whitlow Academy. You're late for room A1. Whitlow Academy. I don't know how it happened. I don't know why, but it remembered me. I thought I erased myself from Redwood Hills High, but whatever this is, it remembered me anyway.